Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the reveal of number 27 in my power rankings, a deep dive into the New York Giants. For the third episode in a row here, we've got the trifecta of New York teams not projecting a great year here for the state of New York. And this Giants team was right up there with my best calls from my 2017 deep dives, where at a time when a lot of NFL analysts were picking this Giants team to go to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, had them number one in the power rankings, I, on the other hand, was saying I had a hard time seeing this team even making the playoffs, that this defense was going to take a step back, and that this offense had this allure of being this explosive offense, when in reality, both on film and by whatever metric you looked at, it was a really bad offense that season. It was essentially a rundown old car covered in a shiny new coat of Odell Beckham hair coloring. It's an offense predicated on its receiving core, which is not the way to dictate things offensively. Find me a good, consistent offense that doesn't get good quarterback or offensive line play. So 2017 happens, and basically all that comes true. This defense took a step back, and this offense was terrible. They had a hard time getting things going. Some of their receivers got hurt. Well, not some. All of their receivers got hurt. So they lost what little identity they had in the first place. This team turns on its coach. They bench Eli Manning. They lose all their momentum. And now we enter 2018 with this team looking for a bit of a fresh start. Now, I know what the Giants fans are going to say. You're going to say, look at that 2016 team. This is just a better version of them. Well, for starters, I've been saying how ignorant that approach is to take a team's record from a past season, let alone 2 seasons ago, and apply it to the framework of this season. Believe it or not, your team isn't the only team that gets better in that time. You also can't just take a record and apply it to a new framework, where every team has a clean slate, more or less, in terms of injuries, schedules are different, momentum more or less starts clean. So that's just a really flawed approach, taking a team's record and applying it to the next season. And even if that was okay, to say this Giants team is a better version of that team is preposterous to me, because you have a new coach. Like I already mentioned, your momentum was wiped clean, and your culture in this locker room needs some work from that 2016 team that had a bunch of players playing in unity, playing for a cause, which they don't have right now. And 2 of the most impactful veterans on that team, by the way, Jason Pierre-Paul, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, are gone. So we need to take a fresh look at this team. And it certainly doesn't help, by the way. The timing of this video is impeccable, because on Cowherd yesterday, he called the Giants a dark horse Super Bowl contender. Look, I'm not ruling playoffs out for this team, though I'm certainly not going to predict that. This is a new team with new things to talk about and consider. So that's what we're going to do this video. We're going to take a look at the roster, really dive deep into the positions, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. Then we'll get into the predictions, and we'll talk about my expectations for this team. And that transitions here into the quarterback grade. And this is the critical reason why I am much lower on this Giants team, though I think some people might have them just as low, considering they did win 3 games last season. So you got Eli Manning here. And whether you're a stats guy or you're like me and you're a film guy, you like the eye test, it's pretty hard to formulate an argument that says Eli Manning is not a bottom 5 quarterback. And what I see in Eli Manning is a guy who has not been given a great opportunity to succeed, given the type of player he is. He has lost confidence. He is playing less decisive. And that is not helped by the fact that he is physically regressing, when in his prime, he already wasn't a great physical quarterback. So that is also affecting his accuracy and confidence. So while I think Eli actually does take a step up in terms of his production, and that Saquon Barkley and adding a left tackle is going to actually help him play better, you can get better from terrible and still be pretty bad. And that's kind of what I'm projecting for Eli, and in turn this offense, as quarterback does have a heavy weight in my power rankings grade. So then behind Eli, you got Kyle Lauletta, which I actually liked this pick, considering you do have Davis Webb here as the high upside project. Now, I'm not necessarily buying into Davis Webb to be the future here, but it did make sense, because if Eli does go down, or how about even this idea, if you have to bench Eli Manning again because he's so bad again, maybe this line does not improve, and maybe the run game doesn't improve as much as you might hope. Well, on a team where you can't protect the quarterback, Sometimes having a mobile quarterback is the best option to get past that. A la Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson last year. This helps you avoid that rush and make some things happen. So maybe Kyle Lauletta can actually do that. And to be honest, at this point in his career, he's probably got about as strong of an arm, even though I don't think Lauletta has a good arm at all. And he might be just as accurate as Eli Manning, even though his mental edge isn't quite as good. So if Lauletta is playing for this Giants team by the end of the year, I'm not going to be stunned. And then as we transition towards running back here, I have kind of a little digression I need to have here. And I talked about this in my Giants draft grades video, but this team passed on a franchise quarterback, at least the potential to have one, to take a running back. And I love Saquon Barkley. We'll talk about him in just a second. I think he has an impact on this team. But when you're picking that high, and you're a team like the Giants where you need to upgrade your quarterback position, and even if you like Eli, he's going to retire very soon. This team needs an answer at quarterback, and when you take Saquon Barkley, I don't think this team's going to be picking in the top 5 anytime soon. And even if they are, there is no guarantee that you're going to be looking at the type of quarterback prospects that were available to them at number 2. And this really stands even if Cleveland went Sam Darnold, but they didn't. So you can say whatever you want about Saquon Barkley, but just hear me out here. Let's quickly talk about the best running backs in the last 25 years of the NFL. Barry Sanders, LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley, David Johnson, Zeke Elliott. Tell me, what do these running backs all have in common? A collection of the best running backs to ever play. No rings. Now, I will admit, having an elite running back can help you dictate games in the regular season against inferior competition, help you get into the playoffs, establish an identity, and collect some chemistry and momentum as you head into the playoffs. I'm not saying running back is meaningless, but in the big picture, when you could have had a Sam Darnold, or even the upside of a guy like Josh Allen in a situation where he can sit and develop and throw the ball to Odell Beckham, or even Josh Rosen, who I liked. Just look at the playoffs and what it takes to win playoff games. You can call this an opinion, but I have a hard time seeing this as not fact, and you can call me stubborn, but running the ball in the playoffs is f***ing hard. Defensive lines show up better than they have all season long. Oftentimes this is cold weather football. Oftentimes these are road games. Thinking back on my life watching football, I can think of one playoff game, and there's probably others that I'm not thinking of, but one playoff game where an elite running back actually dominated a game and was the reason his team won, or at least was a significant portion of, and that was Le'Veon Bell in Kansas City, I believe 2 years ago. Adrian Peterson, 2013 was it? He won an MVP. Yeah, got his team to the playoffs. Where was he in that playoff game when they lost? DeMarco Murray, Zeke Elliott, in their playoff appearances for Dallas, they more or less disappeared against Green Bay. Where were Alvin Kamara, Todd Gurley, Kareem Hunt, and Le'Veon Bell come February when the Super Bowl was happening? The leading rusher for the winning team in the last 5 Super Bowls? LeGarrette Blount 3 times, Percy Harvin once, and CJ Anderson. So I'm not saying running back isn't important, but this idea that it's a devalued position, it's legit, guys. And I love Saquon Barkley. We'll talk about his impact on this team in just a second. But what is this team's answer at quarterback going to be? Not just for this season, because I don't think Eli Manning is the answer. I like this team better with Sam Darnold this year than I do with Eli Manning, but for the next 15, 20 years. So that's why I'm so critical of this Giants team for taking Saquon Barkley. I think it's going to be exciting. If I was a Giants fan, I'm not going to lie, I'd be excited to watch Saquon. But this is a historically great franchise that is thinking Super Bowl. And this was not a Super Bowl winning move. This was we need to compete and win as many games as we can to get back into the playoffs, not necessarily win a Super Bowl. And I think that made this window a little harder because I don't know how this team's going to get a franchise quarterback now. And I'm curious to hear from Giants fans what they think about that point right there. So let's move on to the running back here because it is exciting. Saquon Barkley, I am as big a fan of him as any. And frankly, as a fan of football, I'm glad he went here and not Cleveland or Tampa Bay or some other teams that wouldn't be as fun to watch this guy succeed, because I think that is what he's going to do, is succeed. I have them ranked 5th in terms of the running back ranking in the league already. I had him at 27th, by the way, for quarterback. So he's going to be an exceptional fit here because of that receiving ability. And with this offensive line that we'll talk about, I think it will be better, but it's still going to struggle. Eli Manning needs to check the ball down a lot. And with the way these receivers are able to get vertical and stretch the field, the ability to just put the ball in Saquon Barkley's hands is exciting, and it is going to help things a lot. And the running game will definitely get better as well, though I think the biggest impact will be in those checkdowns. But in turn, defenses having to respect the run more will also open up things in the pass game. So everything's going to open up because it's going to draw defenders in a lot more. That said, I don't think Eli has that ability really to get vertical anymore, but it is exactly what I've been saying, a spark plug to this offense. So then behind Saquon, they bring in Jonathan Stewart. I like that as kind of the relief pitcher on the goal line in short yardage situations. If there is a question about Saquon, it is, can he use that power that he has physically in terms of his running style and not pitter-patter and hit a hole? He will. He'll be able to do it. But if for whatever reason he can't, you got Jonathan Stewart there where that's his game. And then I was never a Wayne Gallman fan. He's basically phased out here. Perkins, whatever. These guys are at the point where they're going to be fighting for roster spots. So then we move on to this receiving core, which is still really good, by the way. So you got Odell Beckham, outstanding, playing for that contract that I think he's going to get before the season starts. I think Odell Beckham is the 3rd best receiver in this league. Sterling Shepard, I'm growing on as I've been watching some more Giants film lately. I think he is underrated as actually one of the 10 to 20 best route runners in this league. If this offense ever really, became a situation where he could have a bigger piece of a bigger pie, I think he would definitely thrive. Then the number 3 here is essentially Evan Ingram. He's kind of an oversized slot receiver, doesn't do a ton of work out of the tight end position. I didn't look at the numbers, but my guess is he only plays tight end like 30% of the snaps. Rhett Ellison does play here at tight end. The depth behind Sterling Shepard at receiver is pretty meh. They bring in Cody Latimer, who's never really done anything for Denver. They did sign Russell Shepard recently. So those two are going to kind of compete for the 3rd receiver here. And then you got guys like Roger Lewis, Travis Rudolph, Khalif Raymond, Amba Edetawa, a bunch of dudes that are basically replacement level guys that are going to compete for the back end of this roster. I don't have a lot of opinions on who is going to fill out this roster. I do think Russell Shepard is the 3rd best wide receiver on this roster. He's a good athlete that's been dealt kind of some tough cards in the NFL in terms of his opportunity and the teams he's been on. So I got this team as the 2nd best receiving core in the NFL. Great unit, but the problem here is, and the reason I still have this little hint in my voice of pessimism, is the offensive line. Now I get it. They improved. They brought in Nate Solder. They gave him a ton of money because they were that desperate for a left tackle. And as the guy who keeps emphasizing the value of that tackle position, I still think they're underpaid. But to see a guy who is an average starter become, I believe, the highest paid left tackle in the NFL gives me goosebumps a little bit just thinking about it. But it is definitely an upgrade. They had Flowers there at left tackle, was, in my opinion, the worst offensive lineman who played every game last year. Just terrible. And Flowers, unfortunately, is still going to start here, I believe, on the right side. And that, it's still, it's not a fully true saying, but your weakest link can really bring your offensive line down. And when that weak link is Eric Flowers, you're not going to have even above average offensive line play. Eli Manning or whoever's playing behind center here is still going to be running for their life a lot. And it's going to be really hard to get these receivers to do their thing when that's the case. And that is why receivers are the icing, not the cake. And then another big point I keep hearing is this team added Will Hernandez. It's going to upgrade the run game. Okay, slow down. Let's not forget that Justin Pugh left. So unless you think Will Hernandez, who I like Will Hernandez a lot. I thought he was the 2nd best guard in that class and a really good run blocker. But unless you think Will Hernandez is an upgrade to Justin Pugh, who got paid a ton of money to go play guard for Arizona, then they're not upgrading that guard position. It's actually a downgrade. Oh, and by the way, your center got paid a bunch of money to leave as well. Richburg, who is a very good center, is gone. So to even say that this offensive line has been upgraded It's actually pretty hard to say that. I would say it's close because you at least have a left tackle now, which is the most important offensive line position, but that interior is not getting upgraded. So let's not forget that before we start saying this team upgraded its offensive line. And then John Jerry's going to play at right guard again. I liked the John Greco signing, a veteran who can play. And then they bring in Patrick Omema as well, who struggled in Jacksonville, but is another veteran who can play. So it's still a bit of a patchwork here, but they did get that left tackle. Overall, it's a group that is still going to limit what this team wants to do. I feel very confident in saying that. So overall, I see an upgrade. I see a spark plug from Saquon Barkley. But in the big picture, it's not like this team is going to climb all the way out of the gutter to being a serviceable offense enough to dictate anything. So let's transition to this defense and talk about if this defense can be any kind of a top 5 defense, which is what it would need to be, by the way, if this Giants team is going to make the playoffs. So we break up the front 7 into run defense, pass rush, and linebacker. So we'll start with the run defense, where this team is excellent. Snacks Harrison leading the charge there, but they bring in Ogletree as well. Olivier Vernon now becomes a part of the linebacking core as an edge rusher here. He is one of the better run defending edge rushers in the entire league. Dalvin Tomlinson proved to be an exciting rookie defensive tackle, so the run defense is really good here. They do definitely have some holes in this linebacking group, and we'll dive into linebackers in a second. But they got some serious impact players in the run game. It's going to be tough to run on this team, but run defense doesn't weigh too much in my rankings. It's much more about can you defend the pass, where I see this team as probably slightly above average. This pass rush, going back to 2016, I actually called overrated. I think Olivier Vernon's a fine player, but I actually don't consider him a number 1 edge rusher. I think he's about as high end of a number 2 as you're going to get. So he's a good player, but he's not a game-breaking defender, I don't think. A guy that defensive coordinators are having nightmares about trying to prepare for. Jason Pierre-Paul leaves. Honestly, for me, that's whatever. He's been extremely inconsistent over the last few years. Basically, since he got his second contract, he has not been the same type of impact defender. And they're going to replace him with Lorenzo Carter, who, by the way, this team is running a 3-4 now. So there are really question marks across the board in terms of how all these pieces come together. Theoretically, in this scheme, Damon Harrison is going to get a lot more attention. We don't know how Olivier Vernon is going to play as a stand-up outside linebacker. So there are some question marks just with the scheme change. But anyway, Lorenzo Carter, I really like him. I had him as a huge sleeper, especially in the 3rd round. I had a 1st round grade on him, a top 15 round grade. I think he's very similar to Leonard Floyd. So if he can be that, that's a good step towards this team becoming a top 5 defense. As I mentioned, they're going to have to be. But he is raw. It's really hard to sit here and say he's going to be an impact edge defender right off the bat, though I do like his future. And I loved that pick. So, I've got them coming in at 23rd in terms of pass rush. I said this pass rush was overrated after that 2016 season. I think it's about the same now. It's fine. But I don't think teams go into this game sweating having to protect their quarterback against this team. I think it's this secondary that's a much bigger asset for this defense, which we'll talk about in a second. The linebackers here, they actually come in tied for 24th. So Alec Ogletree, I actually lean on the side of liking him more than those who will say he's overrated. Now, he definitely hasn't developed much in terms of his play recognition and ability to kind of quarterback a defense and also play in coverage and understand zones. But you cannot question this guy's physical ability to diagnose a run and get to the ball carrier. And when he gets there, he shows up. So I like Alec Ogletree. Maybe the new scheme, new coach, he can start to actually reach his ceiling. But that's a question. And then the other guys here, BJ Goodson, Ray Armstrong, really not a whole lot to get excited about. Mark Herzlich's still here, but he's more just a special teamer. So this linebacking crew definitely has some work to do and is certainly the biggest hole on this defense. So then in the defensive backs, and this is really where this team thrived so much 2 years ago. And they still have some good pieces here, although Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie is gone, and his 2016 season was incredible. So they've dropped off a little bit, but they still come in tied for 7th. At corner, you got Janoris Jenkins, who is a shutdown corner, a true number 1, but he is getting older. I still think he's going to be great. And then you got Eli Apple, who, man, he has to figure his life out. There was questions a couple months ago if he was going to get cut. Clearly, they're going to trust in him to figure this out. Now, he's an excellent man defender, but as I've been watching this Giants team, when they go zone, he can be a serious liability. So he really needs to hit the film room, not so much trust that his athletic ability is just going to make him a good corner. He's fine as a number 2. A lot of teams, he'd be a number 1. But I seriously think he has a lot of upside that he has not shown yet. So I don't hate Eli Apple, I just want to see more. And then in the nickel, this is kind of the team's weakness. Right now I'm seeing Curtis Riley being the starting nickel back here. They did sign Grant Haley out of Penn State. I think he's going to win this job. I really do. I like Grant Haley a lot. I had a 4th or 5th round grade on him as a nickel back. This is a really deep class of nickel corners and dime safeties. So there is a drop-off in corner, certainly after those top 2. You got Teddy Williams, Deontay Dion. They signed William Gay, who could absolutely be the starting nickel here. That's just not what Our Lads is showing, but that is probably the favorite to be the starter is William Gay in the nickel. And B.W. Webb. And then these safeties, you got a lot of talent. You got Landon Collins. What else can you say about the guy? I mean, he covers well, total playmaker. He can basically become a linebacker and hide some of the weakness this team does have at linebacker. So I love what he does for this defense on all 3 levels. And then Darian Thompson, you know, he kind of took that starting job back last year as a 3rd round pick. I don't see him as the future here, but they're going to give him another year to try and develop, as he did take Andrew Adams' job as the starting free safety last year. Can Adams make a bounce back and take that job back? I don't think it makes too much of a difference. And then they also signed Michael Thomas. So you really got 4 safeties here that are going to make sure they have a good line of last defense here. Overall, as we take a look at this team, they come in 23rd for defense. They do get a drop off because of the scheme change and culture. There's just a lot of questions there on how all these pieces are going to come together. But I do think that is the lowest that this defense could be. It's definitely not a bad defense, and 23 might make it seem a little lower than it ends up being. But to get much higher than that, you are projecting some things that are difficult to say. And then offensively, again, might seem low, but I think if you take Saquon Barkley off this team, I'd probably have him 32. I think that offensive line and the quarterback, it's still a problem. Though I think Saquon is a better way to upgrade that than, say, 2 years ago when they took Evan Ingram, and I thought that was just insane when they need offensive linemen. And as you can see, the coach and culture thing, 29th. And I like Pat Shurmur. You know, I don't look too much into his Browns days. It's hard to be a head coach for the Cleveland Browns. I was really impressed with what he did in Minnesota, but a lot of his success came on play action and bootlegs and the mobility of Case Keenum and using that to his advantage. I will say it's a pretty similar situation where the Vikings didn't have a great offensive line either, and Pat Shurmur found a way to make it work. So I think offensively, a great fit. This is a team that has locker room problems. You'd be kidding yourself to say that they didn't. It was the biggest headache of a locker room last year, so the culture in general is going to take a big step from Pat Shurmur to bring these guys together this season to have any sort of elite winning culture here. So that's kind of the explanation on why the culture is lower and why I'm less willing to, kind of have optimistic projections for this Giants team. So last thing we got to do here is look at the schedule and talk about my expectations for this team. And as you would expect for an NFC team, it's a very difficult schedule. Another reason why it's hard to be optimistic about this team. It's going to be hard for them to get going and start to roll in this NFC, especially when you take a look at the start of this schedule. Now, I actually gave them a win against Jacksonville at home to start the year, but then you got to go to Dallas, got to go to Houston. Don't necessarily know what you're going to get there. Then you got the Saints at Carolina, Philly, at Atlanta. You got 4 really tough games against some of the best teams from last season. So I've got this team starting 1-6, and that plays into this entire thing. If you think this Giants team and this locker room is going to start with a bad record and then all of a sudden turn a corner and turn things around, that's a really optimistic approach for what we've seen from this team that went absolutely south last year and has some strange vibes going on in that team. So if they start 1-6, which I think is going to happen, or maybe 2-5, Coach Shurmur's going to have his hands full. Then things lighten up. You get Washington, go to San Francisco, which I don't see them winning. Tampa Bay, at Philly, Chicago, at Washington, Tennessee, at Indy, and Dallas. So, that last stretch, it's all winnable games. It's a competitive team. On paper, they could certainly turn things around. I'm not going to rule that out. But playoffs for this team is very, very difficult for me to say. They got them at 7.5 wins. I think that's too high. They came out 6-10 here, and that was being pretty optimistic towards the second half of that season. Like I mentioned, if this team starts 1-6, they might not have the momentum to win some of these more winnable games towards the back end of this schedule. So I've got them with a win range of 3-9, which is going to be almost impossible for them to make the playoffs in this NFC. I think the only way that happens is if this defense can become a top 5 defense. I think what is really pivotal there would be Lorenzo Carter becoming a starting caliber impact edge rusher to get after the other team's quarterback, and Eli Apple taking a step forward as the number 2 corner here. Those are really 2 pivotal players if you want to talk playoffs for this team, because offensively, I've already said, it's going to be better, but with Eli Manning and this offensive line, I don't see a running back, no matter how good, making this a team that's going to have the above average offense that it's going to need to carry this team into the playoffs. So that's going to do it. Really excited to hear feedback on this one. A lot of opinions surrounding this Giants team. I'm excited to go at it with you guys, the Giants fans, in the comments. I know you're going to come at me. Non-Giants fans, what do you think? How do you think the Giants do this year? We'll see you guys for number 26 soon. As always, cheers. We'll see you next time.